was saying the next speaker is Dr. Payet, and he is an international policy expert, researcher, speaker on environment, climate, and island issues. And he has a very big bio, including being a Minister of Environment and Energy in the Cabinet of Seychelles from 2012 to 2014. Currently, the United Nations Executive Secretary for the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention. He has won numerous international awards and is recognized for his work on islands and climate change. May I present your presentation?
Yes, please. Can you hear me well? Can you see me
Yes,
too?
we can hear you very well. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, shall I start?
Yes, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dinar, and a pleasure and for the opportunity to be able to talk at this, Green, what is it called? Green Institute. Okay, there we go. Now, shifting a bit from what my colleague from UNEP was talking about, but believe me, it is within the same context. Is I'm going to move on and talk about the issue of chemicals and wastes, and this is where plastic pollution really sits in. And from there, you have all the different impacts on biodiversity and the links to climate change. Even next slide. And just to give you a couple of examples is that as you know, plastics comes from fossil fuels, and also plastics have issues with, for example, flooding because of poor waste management. Plastics have been involved also in epidemics of especially to do with malaria, mosquito, waterborne diseases, because plastic containers hold water and they are found in all sorts of places. So the links to both human health, biodiversity, and climate change is really dramatic when you start digging deep into the plastic waste. If you understand my pun. Now, for those of you who are not so much aware of the three important conventions based here in Geneva, the first one is the Basel Convention, and this was adopted in 1989 and currently has 191 parties. In fact, last week we just had one party who joined, and that's the small Principality of San Marino, who is actually surrounded by Italy. And for them, it's quite a big challenge because they are such a small country and they need to be able to manage their waste. So they have an agreement with the government of Italy for their waste to be managed in Italy itself. And this brings me, of course, to the perspective of a small island nation from which I come from. I come from the Seychelles, which is just east of Africa here. And our biggest challenges, obviously, is to do with how do we manage some of those wastes, because some of those wastes we cannot, and we don't have the systems in place at the national level to be able to deal with those complex wastes, and whether it is recycling or material recovery or anything. So, but the Basel Convention provides the framework for the transboundary movement of hazardous waste, which means that, for example, an old mobile which is not working, the Seychelles can send it to a country which has the facilities and the technology to be able to take apart this mobile and remove the precious metals, also the other precious materials in this mobile phone, and have it used again in a life cycle approach so that we can make and reuse those materials in other products. And of course, that's the intention of the convention. And as you know, it doesn't always work this way, because some countries have actually used the Basel Convention to send waste to other countries. And those countries don't have the capacity nor the technology in place to deal with those wastes. And as a result, those wastes are dumped either in dump sites where they are burnt and causing a lot of other environmental and pollution problems, or dumped in the oceans, or dumped in the rivers, which of course has increasingly led to the big ocean plastic patch that we know about. So the Basel Convention is a very, very important convention which controls the transboundary movement of waste and hazardous waste. There's also the other aspect of it, which is the illegal transboundary movement of waste, where it is much cheaper for the waste to be disposed or dumped somewhere else, because especially in very advanced countries, the cost of disposal of waste is very high. So they look for countries, especially in the South, Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, where there's a lack of rules and institutions and policing of waste management, and there huge boats with containers take those waste there, and they are dumped illegally. So the Basel Convention plays a very, very important role in managing the movement of waste around the world. So we have both an illegal waste, for example, partnership called Enforce. We also have a plastic waste partnership, which brings together the private sector, governments, and everybody to look at waste. And then we have a household waste partnership. We have a mobile phone partnership. All these are partnerships where we work with countries and industry and of course civil society in trying to address this global, whether it's illegal or illegal trade in wastes. The second convention is the Rotterdam Convention, and that was adopted in 1998 and has 165 parties. And basically, this convention is a prior informed consent convention, which means that it's an information exchange convention where countries that are sending chemicals such as pesticides and in some cases industrial chemicals to another country, where they need to notify that country that they are sending those chemicals, and that country has to ensure they have the necessary facilities and capacities in place for them to be able to use those chemicals. This is a very important convention which has received a lot of attention recently because it is concerning, chemicals such as asbestos and pesticides, such as which is used extensively in agriculture. And some of these chemicals have been found to have impacts on the environment and on health, and as a result, the distribution has been under the management of this convention. The third convention, which was adopted much later in 2001, already has 186 parties, and the Stockholm Convention deals with persistent organic pollutants, which means that these are chemicals that have been found to be extremely toxic and dangerous to human health and the environment. And by toxic, what I mean by that is they take a long time to degrade in the environment. Some of them take years, some of them take decades to degrade into the environment. As a result, they accumulate in both animals, plants, and of course, us as human beings, as being on top of the food web. And with the accumulation of these chemicals in our bodies, it has impacts on childbearing, has impacts on when we get older, and it has impacts on the functioning of our nervous system, of our endocrine system, and wreaks havoc, obviously, with our health. So the Stockholm Convention has been instrumental, for example, in listing, for example, DDT, which, as you know, has been used extensively in Africa in the treatment of malaria. And today we have only very, very few countries that are allowed or have had exemptions on the use of DDT, and we are hoping that it will be phased out very soon. We have also known as PCBs, which are used in electricity transformers and are increasingly now being eliminated. And there are deadlines set and targets set by parties by which to eliminate these chemicals from our planet. And recently, at our last COP 4 weeks ago, the parties also decided to list chemicals that are also found in plastics. These are additives that are added to plastics that strengthen their use or their role. And one of these additives was used as a UV blocker, which means that it stopped the plastic from degrading, from being exposed to the sun. And as you can imagine, a lot of the number of plastics that we use are used in the outside environment. So if they break down, we have other kinds of problems. But of course, if they don't break down, they last forever, basically. So we have another kind of problem. So these additives were added to those plastics, and the Conference of the Parties to this convention decided to add those additives to the list for phase out because they have been found to have these toxic properties. And countries and in the industry now have to sit down and look for alternatives and bring in new alternatives which are non-toxic, which are more sustainable for use in the different uses that they were being used before. Now, this is just a quick overview because I realize some of you have never heard about those three conventions. If you can move on to the next slide. The next slide, because our topic is on plastics, I just wanted to share with you the where are we now? You're on the last slide. Go back, go back, go back. Okay, I was following from my own slide, so I didn't know. So you don't change until I tell you to change. So go back, go back. Okay, there. Stop there. Okay, fine. So this is just a quick overview of the plastics life cycle. And of course, when we look at this slide here, we saw that there are two main sources of plastics and polymers coming into the plastic life cycle, and these are those that are biomass based. That means they are coming from plants and vegetation, but then there are those that are coming from the production from the extraction of oil. That means they are fossil fuel based. And the large majority of plastics actually comes from fossil fuel. They are converted from oil into the components to make plastic. And there it enters into a chemical phase where you have the different chemicals, but also you have the polymers. So plastics are actually polymers, which are repetition of chemical units that come together to give the versatility that we know about plastics. But also in plants, for example, we have cellulose. Cellulose is also a polymer-based material, which is probably used also in many applications as replacing plastics. And these polymers are used now to make materials and products. And as I was mentioning, no, go back, go back, go back, please. I haven't finished. Wait until I say next slide, and then you can move. Then these materials are then turned into products that we use, for example, clothing, the glasses, furniture, and in all sorts of specialized products as well in industry. And the problem is when we finish with these products, we just throw them away, and then they become waste. And there are systems, lack of systems in place for waste management. And as we can see here, there are hazardous chemicals that are also added to those materials and products which enter to the environment. Now, some of these wastes are also, they take a long time to degrade. Please, can you go back? Yes. And when they degrade in the environment, they call what we call microplastics. And these are very, very small components. Microplastics are also added, for example, in cosmetics, in creams, and all these enter into the environment. And polluting the environment, but not only polluting the environment, but they can be absorbed into our body. And recent scientific information has found that as those chemicals in plastics enter into our bloodstream, and there's research ongoing now to see whether they can penetrate the blood-brain barrier. And as you can imagine, this is a very serious concern, and that's why we have this global effort to look at an international treaty on plastic. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, the Stockholm Convention on Organic Pollutants has 3 annexes. The chemicals that are put in Annex A are to be eliminated completely from the planet. Annex B, they are to be restricted. That means there are specific uses for which they've been allowed to use. And Annex C is looking at reduction and elimination. And they have a timetable. They have so many years to be able. And this gives time to industry and to governments to put in place the laws, but also for industry to look at alternatives to this. So next slide, please. And as I mentioned before, the Rotterdam Convention is about information exchange. Next slide, please. Basel Convention then has 3 important pillars, and I talked a little bit more about Basel Convention in my introductory slide, and it is really, back please, prevention and minimization. And that's important because you have a system where you are creating too much waste, like single-use plastic, for example. And we've seen many countries around the world has put in laws to ban single-use plastics because they are inefficient. We use it only once, and so much energy and so many resources have gone into this that we've ended up with so much plastic bags. So this is one area where we can have prevention. We can also have minimization, again by eliminating single-use plastics. Then the Basel Convention also comes in a very important area called environmentally sound management. That means it provides support and advice to governments and to industry on which technologies are sustainable or which technologies are environmentally sound. And this is important because we have some technologies that are not so environmentally sound. So the convention plays a very important role. And finally, as I mentioned before, the convention is plays a very important role in controlling the movement of a transboundary movement of waste. Next slide, please. And these are some of the highlights you can see here. And I think the slide is not showing everything, but since 1989, the convention has been working on different waste. And this is not only plastic waste, but battery, lead acid batteries, e-waste, and all the other kinds of waste. As you know, it's a very complex subject, very complex area. And just at the last in 2019, the Basel Convention became the first treaty actually to focus on plastic waste, and through that, back please, and through that there was the plastic waste amendments, which essentially started to control the movement of plastic waste around the world, and that led obviously to the COPs that we had this year, which decided on guidelines for plastic waste and other measures, looking, for example, at tires. As you know, tires, when they get used, they create small little pieces of plastic, which I mentioned before, microplastics. And they found out, even in very, very clean countries, they have not been paying attention to the microplastics coming from tires as they are used by vehicles. And this is known to cause a number of environmental problems. And now we are working with industry to see how we can reduce the emissions of microplastics from tires. I will stop here. Of course, there's a lot more that I can say about these three conventions, but I hope this will give you a broad introduction to the work we are doing and the impact that we are having in addressing the challenges of plastic pollution. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you. Unfortunately, because of time, we can't take a question, but I'm sure the audience is really informed about the Basel, the Stockholm, and the Rotterdam conventions with your presentation. So we